Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. We've had busy schedules, so it's been a second since we got to you, but here we are with an episode. Marko woke up at 5:30 in the morning to get this episode to you. It's still 7:30 for me. I've got two kids screaming outside the office door right now as I'm recording this intro. So we'll try and get you another one in short order. This one starts a little slow because, in part, we woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do this episode for you, but I actually thought it landed in a really interesting place, and I thought it was some very good analysis. So, Marko, thank you for being the hero of this one, for getting up at 5. Listeners, you can email me at jacob@jacobshapiro.com. I'll CC Marko on anything that you send in. Send us your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, everything else. We love hearing from you. Take care of the people that you love. Cheers. We will see you out there. All right, listeners. Both of our schedules are crazy. I don't know how to explain to people, Marko, what Mardi Gras week is like in New Orleans versus the rest of the world. There's no childcare. Everything is crazy. It's very nice, but it's just kind of a crazy, hectic time. And not to get too TMI on Parent Corner, but everyone else in my household, not me, thankfully, knocking on the wood, had a stomach bug over the past week. So that was fun. But I woke up and, this morning we haven't bombed Iran yet, and the world just seems just about as it usually is. How are you doing over there?
Oh yeah, just for me, it's just travel and all that stuff. I think what our listeners, some of our fans don't understand is why we don't do this more often, and it's because that we have real jobs. So this is on the side, and so that means Friday morning at 5:30 start for me to fit this into my schedule, or of course weekend recordings and so on. But yeah, it's I think none of us have any prep, so this is going to be great because today it's like instead of organized basketball, Jacob and I are just going to pull up to just like a local neighborhood court and just freestyle. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. It's almost like we're the band Fish. We're just gonna do a jam for a little while. And any of you listeners who want to write in and say where's the next episode, take a deep breath and then say Marko's up at 5:30 doing this for me on a Friday. Maybe I'll just send him a thank you. Although we do have a couple listeners, Marko, who are telling us there are other ways we should make $1 billion. So maybe we have to get in touch with those folks. But that's a conversation for another time. I want to start off with some trivia. There are 6 countries in the world whose heads of state attended all of the following events: the Beijing military parade, the Davos Board of Peace launch, and the Washington Board of Peace first meeting. 6 countries. Can you guess what the countries are?
Oof. Is Kazakhstan one?
Kazakhstan is one. Kazakhstan actually proposed that there should be the creation of a President Trump Award at the Board of Peace to honor President Trump's incredible and heroic commitment to peace and everything else that's happening in the world. So yes, Kazakhstan won. What else you got?
Fucking nailed it, dude. That was just like, that was
they
like
pay you the big bucks.
This is Steph Curry from the booth, scoring a 3-pointer during the All-Star weekend. Okay, let's see what else. Turkey?
Not Turkey, no.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, Board of Peace. Okay, that wouldn't work. That was a bad one.
They were at Board of Peace, I believe. I'm not sure if they weren't at Beijing or Davos, but yeah. Yeah, anyway.
Mongolia?
Not Mongolia. So here, I'll give you the rest of our list. Uzbekistan was on there. President Trump could not pronounce their leader's name, but they're on there.
Nobody can. It's fine.
I can. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, because it took me a couple days to learn how to do that, which one would say that the only job of an American president, the top representative of the U.S. in the world, is to learn other people's names, but whatever. Pakistan, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. And I don't know if our producer is going to let us put the audio to the song that was playing in the background while they were taking their picture at the Board of Peace, but it was Gloria, that 1980s banger. I don't know. Is there anything you want to say about the Board of Peace? I find the Board of Peace absolutely. If you go and look, there's a list of all the different things that the different countries contributed. The United States is contributing $10 billion to the Board of Peace and the reconstruction of Gaza. There's another couple billion in there. But as you go down the list, it gets more and more puny with apologies to the countries that are submitting things. It was like, yes, and the Emirates will contribute this much money, and this country will contribute this much money, and then Egypt will train the police, and Jordan will send some. I was half expecting Japan sending PlayStations to be down on the list. I don't know. It was a fun moment.
I have nothing to say about the Board of Peace, really. I mean, I think look, on some level, something like that needs to exist, right? My question is this intended to operate beyond Gaza? Because it seems like it is. It seems like President Trump's vision for Board of Peace is that this is eventually going to be more important than the UN. And that's what I think is interesting, because having a Gaza specific international body does make sense. It really does. It seems like Israel can't really handle Gaza on its own. I mean, obviously, that is the understatement of the year. So yeah, but it's the spreading of this beyond Gaza that is intriguing, right? And I think the ultimate problem with Board of Peace is that once President Trump is gone, it's going to be tainted with the Trump's presidency for the next Democratic president, or obviously they're going to want to abandon it for all sorts of reasons. And so the concern is going to be longevity.
Yeah, you're being kinder to the Board of Peace than I am. I'm using it as a joke to start off our discussion, and I think that's exactly what it is, a joke. But maybe I have Trump derangement syndrome. I just, it's like, I forget where it comes from, but history repeats itself, first as farce and then as tragedy. I mean, this is farce. It's like, okay, we had the League of Nations, we had the United Nations, both organizations that ultimately failed in the task that was set above them. But no, the Board of Peace with Kazakhstan submitting motions that we're going to create President Trump awards, like that's the one that's really going to lead to global peace. Like, give me a break. And then the other problem with it is, if we actually talk about what they're focused on, which is, yes, money for the reconstruction of Gaza. Okay, what are you doing with Hamas? What are you doing with the radicalized population that actually lives there? Like, they're still going to be there. Have you figured that part out yet? You really just think you're going to press a button and suddenly we're going to get skyscrapers and data centers and everything else Jared Kushner says that is in there? It is just so unbelievably laughable. But hey, maybe the joke's on me. Like, if you believe in the Board of Peace and its mission, go buy some waterfront property in the Gaza Strip. You can, fancy yourself a literal modern day Philistine, and maybe you'll do a really good job. Be good for you. But let's not leave the region. Let's talk about the thing I don't want to talk about, but which we have to talk about, which is Iran. There's a pretty sizable U.S. military force that seems to be building up around Iran. The president has given a roughly 10-day ultimatum to Iran for some kind of progress in a deal. There's a second aircraft carrier that's moving there. I know, cousin, you think this is sort of one of the most important geopolitical risks of the year, of the quarter. I don't know how you would characterize it. I'm still unimpressed, but I can hear my bias in the background telling me that I'm unimpressed because I'm uninterested in this. So where do you want to start with Iran?
I think you're just exhausted and bored. I think
I am bored. I am fundamentally bored with this story.
No, I mean, like this was obviously a big part of all that we had to do last year, and we thought we put it to rest, I guess. But it's back, and so yeah. I mean, we have to talk about this because it's serious, and I do think that the Trump administration is leaning towards military action. So maybe we differ there, but the talks, the verbiage out of the talks has been very positive. Like, both sides are saying nice things, which is surprising. President Trump agreed to move the negotiations from Turkey to Oman, which is something Iran requested. Those negotiations went well. The Geneva one went relatively well. Iranians are saying that things are being agreed upon. The Trump administration is saying they haven't gone far enough. And I think this might be one of those situations where Trump has just decided that he needs to attack Iran. Why? There's a whole slew of reasons. First and foremost, why not set back Iran's ballistic missile program? There is an infrastructure around that program. You can attack it. You can attack further the nuclear program as well, beyond the 3 sites that the US hit in 2025. And then you can negotiate from a position of strength at that point. Now, what's the danger? The danger is that when President Trump ordered the assassination of General Soleimani of the IRGC in 2020, Iran's retaliation was focused on US military bases. President Trump, very coolly, basically said, I understand why they did that. this operation is not over. He didn't retaliate to their retaliation. Similarly, in 2025, the U.S. attacked Iran, as you and I argued, in many ways to stop Israel's continued attacks. It did it to just kind of put its foot down and say, okay, fine, we destroyed Fordo, Israel, you go back, no more fighting, Iran, that's it. Iran again retaliated against U.S. military bases, and President Trump did not retaliate to that retaliation. The problem this time around is that the domestic situation in Iran is much worse, as when we had our former colleague and friend Kamran Bukhari come to our show, he talked about the IRGC versus the military, the Ayatollah versus the president, how bad the domestic situation is. We've never seen protests like this since 2009. So we cannot guarantee, you and I, to our listeners, that this time around Iran will retaliate against American attacks in a sort of a sequential, coordinated way, as they have in 2020 and 2025. And this is where I think it's important to discuss a little bit the capabilities of Iran. There is a real asymmetry of capabilities. Iran's military is an like mid 20th century military. They're incapable of fighting a sophisticated war. Israel proved this last year. Israeli jets were basically flying willy-nilly or in the airspace of Iran, completely unopposed. Any aircraft that takes off in Iran will immediately be destroyed. It has no surface-to-air missile defense, as it has been proven, at least any that is of any use. The S-300s that they purchased from Russia are nowhere to be found, or they have been destroyed by Israeli attacks. And so if Israel and its F-16s, which are a, pretty old aircraft, quite frankly, not sophisticated, if Israel can be flying all over Iran, then what do you think the United States of America can do? The US can turn Iran into a parking lot and Iran won't even realize what's happening. So that sounds great. Okay, why not attack Iran? Well, because their ability to wreak havoc in the region is, I think, underestimated because of their inability to defend themselves. And so that's what I mean by asymmetry. The Houthis in Yemen, which are allied with Iran, and I think sometimes we overstate how much the Houthis take their orders from Tehran, although I think that if Iran is attacked, they are likely to do to the Strait of Hormuz, they're likely to do to the Persian Gulf what they did to the Red Sea. And that is basically closed shipping. How can they do that? Drones. We're in a world, like when I started my career in finance, the very first report I ever wrote was on whether Iran can interdict shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. And that was back in 2011, Jacob. Like that was 15 years ago. And of course, we talked about this at Stratfor. And at the time, it was all about anti-ship cruise missiles, ASCMs, that Iran had, that it bought from China. Can it attack tankers with cruise missiles? Can it use Zodiac boats filled with dynamite? Today, 15 years later, forget Zodiacs, forget cruise missiles. It's all about drones. And so, yeah, the Houthis can use drones to attack shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. They can attack UAE and Saudi transportation facilities, refineries, production facilities, random oil fields in the middle of the desert. Like that's what can happen. And by the way, they've done that before as well. So what I worry about is that while, yes, the United States of America can fight this war from 30,000 feet, can elegantly and in a sophisticated manner just degrade Iran's capabilities, there is still this ability for Iran to attack the shipping. And so, and production of oil. And by the way, just for you listening to this, it's like, okay, but how much oil really goes through here? It's 30% of global oil supply, and it could be taken offline for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. On one side, what does that do? Nothing. The world has plenty of storage. The world has about 3 months worth of storage right now. So that means like if you put all the storage for oil of all the countries around the world, there's about 2 to 3 months worth. So even if we lost all the oil in the world, it would be like fine, right? And I think that what we're describing is a scenario in which Iran does something it has not done since the 80s, which is threaten shipping. And at that point, Trump just moves the gear of the US military operations from, you know, bloody Iran's nose to turn Iran into the Abbasid Caliphate from the medieval era. And then at that point, it becomes all about pain. It becomes all about the United States of America using its air assets to impose so much pain that Iran stops the asymmetrical attacks. Because those asymmetrical attacks really can't be destroyed at location. You can't really go and find where the drones are leaving from. You can't destroy all of them. So it becomes just like, well, I got to be punitive. And at that point, it just really gets messy. You're talking about a country of 90 million people that you're at that point no longer attacking their ballistic missile program. You're attacking their bridges. You're attacking their factories. You're attacking their energy facilities. You're attacking their schools. Yes, schools. And if you're sitting there being like, no way, America's going to do that. Let me just tell you, this is exactly what happened to my home country of Serbia. In 1999, NATO's air war against Serbia began with targeting the military and intelligence installations and facilities of Serbia to degrade their ability to conduct military operations in Kosovo. So it began as a military mission, and then effectively, Serbs retaliated by pushing the entire population of Kosovo out. So they started like massive ethnic cleansing on location. And at that point, the Clinton administration just said, fuck it, let's just impose so much pain on Serbia that they have to stop. And it worked. It was about 2.5 months. Would Iranians be more resilient than Serbs? I don't think so. I think holding out 3 months against the greatest military alliance in human history is pretty resilient. I think that Iran would probably do the same. So it's a 2 to 3 month potentially. This could turn into that kind of like Iran is using cheap, unsophisticated ways to interdict shipping and impact oil, energy, and transportation. US is using highly sophisticated to impose pain to make Iran stop. And then we end somewhere in March or April or May with Iran looking like a parking lot. That is a scenario that could emerge out of what's going on now, which is why we have to talk about this. And we have to talk about it in military terms because we have to understand what are the capabilities of players involved. Um, and even though there's asymmetry to it, I do think the asymmetry does not favor Iran. The world has plenty of storage. They cannot maintain the closure of Strait of Hormuz and Persian Gulf shipping forever. And the US has the upper hand here. And so I don't see why Iran would retaliate beyond hitting American bases. The scenario I just described to you is so negative for Iran. It's so negative that the only thing that makes sense is to kind of let President Trump go through his theater. Just give it to him. Just let him bomb you effectively. Retaliate, obviously, against American bases. God bless you for that. President Trump will say that. He'll say, like, God bless you for that. We understand. Cool. Here's the bases you can hit on this schedule. And I'm sure there's almost like a banal coordination between these two countries. Why does Trump need the attack? I don't know, but he likes it that way. He likes negotiations that start off with America punching someone in the face. There's revelation that he really wanted to do this to North Korea. And I think the reason he was held back from attacking North Korea is because in that case, he had an interlocutor that is not rational, potentially. I mean, I think North Korea is pretty rational, but I think it was difficult for the Trump administration to talk to North Korea at all. Whereas with Iran, there are links. Now they've developed them, and they can just say, like, look, we're going to attack these sites at this time, and you can retaliate against these sites at this time. And then we're cool with that. And then we can go back to the negotiating table. I think President Trump likes that. He's done this before in other situations, although not with military force, but just with like tariffs and stuff. He likes to bloody the nose and then go back to the negotiating table. Why? Because it allows him to sell the deal that he made domestically as a brilliant deal that was negotiated with force, with strength. Like I went in there and I slapped Zelensky in the White House, and then I made a deal. I showed him. I went in there and I threatened to take dairy, control from Trudeau, and then he signed a deal. It's always that like the deal that's on the table is one I negotiated through strength. And I think it's almost that domestic focus, the theater itself is part of the White House negotiating strategy. So I hold out hope that when this attack starts, it will be highly coordinated with Tehran, where they like know exactly what's going on. But I fear that because of the domestic instability inside Iran, the White House may be overstating to what extent they're talking to a country that's capable of like wink, wink. Okay, cool. You attack us, we retaliate in a rational way. This might, in other words, go from a very coordinated attack like 2025 into the 1999 NATO war against Serbia scenario, which is much longer. And of course, the difference is Serbia doesn't produce absolutely anything that's critical for global economy other than top
Other
athletes.
and
You know,
geopolitical analysts, don't sell yourself short.
yeah.
Um,
Hashtag supreme athlete bodies here. You know what I mean? Just flabby Balkan athletes crushing it. Iran is not Serbia. In other words, it's I think far more geopolitically relevant.
yeah,
Anyways, that's
there's
my
just
thoughts.
there's just a few issues with it. But if I continue your thoughts, I think there's more than the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, I think they can fool around with Iraq in a pretty serious way via the
For
Shiite
sure.
militias there, and they can cause a lot of problems there. I also think, when you look back to the war with Israel, one of the reasons the war was so short, or at least according to report, was that the Israelis were running out of missile interceptors that they were getting from the United States, that there was a limited amount of time that they could continue defending themselves from the Iranian strikes without incurring significant damage. And the Iranians really didn't show off the full extent of their capability. So there's a version of this argument that the Iranian regime actually wants to pick a fight because they were embarrassed in the war last year. And they just want to put everyone on notice, including the United States, that, hey, we have more capabilities than you're thinking of. To your point, you're not just going to make us a parking lot. Maybe you will in a couple of months, but you're going to have more damage than just an increase in the price of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. But I struggle with this because, I mean, even if you look at this from the point of the deal with President Trump, the time to do this would have been early January, when you had Iranians in the street, when you had real pressure on the Iranian regime. This Iranian regime is not under pressure. They killed the protesters. They crushed them. They're gone. And none of the back and forth in the negotiations is about the protests or the treatment of the Iranian people or anything like that. The Iranian negotiators are talking about how they're making progress and how the United States isn't requesting zero enrichment, and it's all about how Iran's nuclear program can be peaceful. I mean, as you sort of say, this coordinated dance back and forth. I also just think, in the background, this happened. What was this, yesterday? Yeah, this happened yesterday. President Trump told Congress that he wants to continue pursuing a civil nuclear pact with Saudi Arabia without including any of the non-proliferation safeguards that the Biden administration, that even Marco Rubio had said should be in that deal with Saudi Arabia, which allows snarky geopolitical analysts like me to say, okay, no nuclear weapons for Iran, but Saudi Arabia, like, yes, you can have nuclear weapons. And like, there's just a level of hypocrisy there that I do think matters on the global stage. And we can get to that in a second. All of which is to say, it doesn't seem to me like you're going for the attack. Like, the time to attack, that would have been January 11th or 12th, because then the Iranian regime really was reeling, and then you could have done something. Blooding the nose, you already bloodied the nose. You bloodied the nose last year, like during the context of the war with Israel. You really want to go here? And I hate to be conspiracy theory about this, but you mentioned, why is President Trump doing this? I mean, the Epstein files are out there. And I'm not going to pretend like they're not out there. He's out there saying, "Oh, I'm totally exonerated." You're not totally exonerated. Like, nobody's totally exonerated who's in these things. I saw that great meme of, he's mentioned more times in the Epstein files than Jesus is in the Bible. Like, like, there is a reckoning here domestically that has to happen for President Trump. And the economy is more important, I think, than the Epstein files. Sorry to burst those of you listening, but he's got problems with the economy at home. Maybe the
Well,
tariffs
the
are about to come
tariffs.
down.
Yeah,
He's got
USMC. Sorry, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of U.S. might rule tariffs against tariffs right now, today.
And I've
Right?
never really bought the argument that U.S. presidents do things from foreign policy to distract from domestic policy. But I look at all of the reasons on the board. I can't divine any U.S. strategic purpose in an attack. I can't really divine any, to your point, Iranian strategic purpose in an attack, because maybe they can make themselves look good for a few months, but it's still not going to end well for them. It just, to make your point about political theater, seems like political theater. And then the last thing, just about North Korea. I mean, North Korea, you're right that there was more uncertainty at the lower ranks. But Kim Jong-un wanted to meet Donald Trump. That's what he wanted. He wanted the photo op with Donald Trump. That was the thing that he was after.
Mm.
If the supreme leader was willing to have the photo op with Trump, I bet this would be done already. The issue is that the supreme leader and the guardians of the revolution are
Doesn't
absolutely
care.
not. Whereas, the mandarins and the foreign ministers, they're like, oh yes, we can negotiate on the nuclear program. And also here's a watch that I have to sell you. And can we join the Board of Peace? And we could, send pistachios to the Gaza Strip. It would be a really good source of protein for the starving Gazan people. Anyway, I'm going off the rails. Save me.
No, I mean, look, you are arguing on whether or not it makes sense logically to attack Iran. I think that we need to go back and kind of go above that. In other words, just look at this in a nihilistic way and just coolly and calmly say, what is Trump's negotiating style? And I've long argued that there's this 7 steps of maximum pressure, which is basically a fancy way of saying taco. The taco trade that people in the markets like. If you're listening to this and you don't know what the taco trade is, it stands for Trump always chickens out. And so he always starts with big bluster and then makes a deal at the end. So it's a way to tell investors, don't panic, don't sell everything, just calm down and buy eventually because he will calm down. I think it's unfair to Trump because he doesn't chicken out. Chickening out would mean he didn't do anything. You could argue the North Korea situation was chickening out because we got kind of nothing out of that. But everything else that Trump does, he does get something out of it. It's just not as impressive as what he started with. But President Trump has a way of doing things, and this is why I last year I never really got bearish on the equity market. I was always like, don't panic. He's going to turn the ship around. This is what he always does. He starts off by asking for the moon. That's the first step. He asks his counterpart to buy him and build him a staircase to the moon. And then everybody laughs and is like, haha, he's not serious. And step 2 is he says really mean stuff. No, I am serious. I've got a bigger red button than you do, right? Which is what he said to Kim Jong-un. Then the third step is he actually punches you in the face. No, I was serious, dude. And that's when the missiles start flying. That's when the tariffs get imposed and so on. And at that point, everybody sells. Everybody panics. Then step 4 is he sits down and starts to negotiate. And at that point, just as he's doing that and everything looks good, step 5 is what I love the most about Trump because he's so clinical about this and always does it. It's the step when he leaves the bride at the altar. Just when he's about to make a deal, he's like, no, I don't like you. Boom. And then step 6 is he goes back to the negotiating table. Step 7, he makes a deal, and it's the greatest deal ever made. But everyone's forgotten about his demand to build a staircase to the moon. He actually asks you to help him fix the Christmas lights on the top of his house. And he brings the ladder. And you're like, wait, that's it? He's like, yeah, man, just hold the ladder. I got this. And you're like, well, why didn't you just ask me this in the first place, bro? I would have done it. So why does he do this? Why? Yeah, it's an ego thing, sure. But there's another reason. And the other reason is that there's about 25 to 30% of the American public, largely his supporters, who just want America to disengage from the rest of the world, hate the rest of the world, are fans of Vladimir Putin, don't want to help Ukraine, want to bomb Iran or don't. I don't even know anymore. The MAGA camp is kind of amorphous and wants the US to take a step back, wants some countries to get invaded. Nobody knows anymore. The point is, he does this not because the theater is to satisfy and satiate just his ego. It's also because it's a way to convince his supporters that the deal he ultimately produced is one that was negotiated from a position of strength. Hey, man, we got a great deal. Look what I did to Iran. And so that's why this is happening, Jacob. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. Didn't we already have step 3, blooding the nose, in 2025? Didn't the U.S. already attack Iran? Yes, but it didn't go far enough, and there's no deal. U.S. and Iran have not produced a deal since the bombing of last year. So I think we're at the beginning of the process again. And I think that he feels that he has sufficient amount of time ahead of the midterms to make this happen. I think he feels that if oil prices were to go to $120 from current, 60, 65, he's okay. Gasoline prices spike in the US, but I think he's been told by everyone in the commodity markets and I know because I talk to these people, the oil traders in Zug in Geneva, you know exactly who you are. He's talked to all these experts and they're all convincing him that there's an oversupply in the market. And so he feels that if he just did this for the next month, I mean, it is February. If gasoline prices just spike in February and March, but then come down violently in April when the conflict ends, he feels like, yeah, it's worth it. Like I can risk higher gasoline prices now. The election is in November. And if by November I've got Venezuela turning from pro-Chinese to pro-American, if I've got Iran nuclear deal in the bag, and if I've got Russia, Ukraine, uh, not peace deal, but let's say a legitimate ceasefire, if I got those three things, I mean, that's a pretty decent quiver of foreign policy successes on which to pursue the midterm election. And I think that's what his idea is right now. Now, you and I both know, and so do his advisors, that no president has ever, in the history of the United States of America, won a midterm election on foreign policy, except for maybe George W. Bush. That's the only example that we can really think of in 2002. But I think he's probably saying, like, look, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Everyone's pissed off about quote unquote affordability. They're all blaming me, which is not fair because there's also Joe Biden. There's also like the last 25 years of American politics. Like I'm the reason that America's unaffordable. Come on, bro. So that's what his view is. And he's like, I will never win that fight. Nothing I do, and this is you and I got into an argument about this last time, but like there's just nothing he can do. Nothing he can do to deal with the affordability. And so I think he's just saying, like, look, Jacob, Marko, cool, thanks. I get it. Americans don't care about foreign policy. They're not French people, they're Americans. You know, if I was the French president, this would make sense. I get it. I get it. I get what the history says. But what do you want me to do? And two, I've gone against my advisors before and I've been proven right. So I'm going to make it, I'm going to break, I'm going to make a break for it. You know, I'm going to try to win the midterm with foreign policy. By the way, for those of you listening and wondering why can't the president run a foreign policy? Because he's not on the ballot in the midterm election. That's why. And voters in America, despite Jacob's views, are not that stupid. When they go to the voting poll,
they're definitely that stupid. But sorry.
But listen, throughout American history, they just haven't rewarded foreign policy in midterms because when they go to the election, they look at who's on the ballot and they're like, well, President George H.W. Bush is not on this. President Clinton is not on this. You know, like President Biden's not on this. So what they do, although that wouldn't have helped Biden anyways, because his foreign policy was a disaster. But the point is they go to the voting booth in November. And even if President Trump makes a claim that he's done these three things, they're still not going to reward him or the Republican Party. They're still going to vote for the Democrats, no matter what. I think that's just too late for him. But I think this is why he's doing it. That's the logic.
I guess no, and I hear you, and it's good to be logic and nihilistic about it. You could hear me that I went off the rails there a little bit. I think one of the reasons that I'm having trouble engaging with it with the rational side of my brain is just because there was a window in early January. Like I think in early January, there was a window there where U.S. military support might have actually led to regime change and might have led to a fundamentally different relationship between the United States and Iran. And I have been writing since 2017 that the U.S.-Iran relationship makes no sense, that Iran should be a long-term partner for the United States. And part of me is like, yes, like it's ironic that this could be the moment, but maybe Trump is the one to bring it. And I think one of the things that I find frustrating and hard to stay objective about is he let the protesters get crushed. He went out there on X, he said help is coming, and then help wasn't coming. And now he's dicking around with this? For what? Like you're going to, okay, fine, you're going to bloody the nose. We're talking about Straits of Hormuz. Like the people were in the streets. You said you were going to help them. Like you probably could have flipped the regime at that point. I don't see any scenario here, to your point, in which this Iranian regime flips, even if there's some kind of kinetic conflict. And even if we're talking about the Straits of Hormuz, it's pretty clear to me that like the regime has crushed the skulls that it need to and that it's going to continue. And so maybe you're going to get some sort of, you know, a ladder Christmas lights deal or something like that. And he'll claim credit for it. And that's quite a come down from where we were 6 weeks ago.
But at the same time, I find it interesting you say that. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Jacob, that the protests are a reflection of secular trends in Iran that are not favoring the regime? So wouldn't you say that just because they've abated, just because Iran has crushed them now, they may come back later?
I don't think that protests like that can sustain themselves for a long period of time. Those protests were tied to a sudden collapse in the value of the Iranian currency and economic issues coming to the forefront. And you had people who, for a brief moment, were willing to risk their lives to protest against the regime. And the ones that were bravest, the ones that were out there the most, are gone now, or their families are gone, or they have been crushed. So yes, those secular forces remain there. And maybe there will be another event. Maybe the supreme leader, something happens to him health-wise, or maybe there's a cadre of officers in the Iranian army. This is what Kamran talked about, who will come and will push back against it, and you'll see sort of more help there. But usually, like when you look at this, like protests, if they're going to do something like with the Arab Spring, you have a discrete moment. And once you miss the moment, you're done. That's why in a country like Egypt during the Arab Spring, Mubarak fell because the protesters did not let up in that moment. And countries like the United States started pulling support from the Mubarak regime, and the Egyptian military had to do something. Whereas, if you look at other countries in the Arab Spring, like you can't just keep protesting forever. Also, by the way, as to your question about the intelligence of American voters, here's a poll from Politico and Morning Consult. Only 23% of registered American voters can correctly identify where Iran is on a world map. So if you're trying to make the foreign policy argument to the median American voter, they don't even know where this country is on a map. Okay, well, why don't we pause? Well, anything else? I'll give you the final word on Iran. Anything else you want to say about Iran, or did we take care of it?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've taken care of it because, I think it's going to be, unfortunately, an ongoing issue for the rest of this quarter, maybe next. I just think it's going to stay here. I think this is going to be the most important issue. I've started doing these really brief videos. Jacob, my firm and my CEO, they really want me to do videos, and
that's nice.
Thanks. It's surprisingly difficult to do a 90-second video.
Number one, so hard. People do not understand how hard it is. It's like incredible to do it without breaking. When I have to do videos like that, I have to do like 20 takes until I get the thing that's exactly right.
You know what? I just do it au naturel. So I just go like first or second take. But it's just like I got to plan these out. It's not as simple as people think. It's so fun. My CEO is like, "But dude, it's just 90 seconds, right?" And I'm like, it actually takes time. But listen, the point is, and he, the whole point is, I've decided to do them on Fridays. So today, and I've decided to do them like what am I looking for over the next week? I thought most of my clients, folks in finance, would care if Marko told them, here are the 3 things I think will matter. The problem is that I'm now in this situation where all I'm going to say for the rest of this quarter and maybe next is Iran. It's going to just make the top 3. It has to, and I do have to say it's a little annoying. So I feel your angst as an analyst.
I think there's going to be a deal. I don't think there's going to be a U.S. attack on Iran.
So
that's
okay?
Fine.
I think that's a hot take, and certainly, look, I would say oil prices are up 17% since January 6th, when I originally recommended to my clients they go long oil. And by the way, in 2025, I did not. So I do think this time is different. Not because U.S. will invade or attack Iran. Not because they will do that, but because of other reasons. I don't think the current price really reflects a potential significant attack. So I do think there's potentially more upside. By the way, one thing I just want to say before we move on, a lot of people listening to this are like, but I thought Trump is all about peace. Just to be clear, there is absolutely no discussion of U.S. invading Iran. This would be a limited air campaign, even in a scenario where it gets really, really bad. You're talking 1999 style attack that NATO did on Serbia, which is, yes, we're no longer attacking just military, we're attacking your civilian infrastructure. But one thing to really understand is that George W. Bush administration was profoundly stupid. I don't think we spend enough time talking about that. The U.S. has military capabilities by which it doesn't have to attack somebody with ground troops. And Trump has figured that out. Oh shit, it took America 25, 30 years to figure that out since 1999. So that's just one thing I would say this. I still think that this fits into his foreign policy style. And I think this is where America's going to be for the next 10, 20 years, which is that I think the stigma of putting troops on the ground is going to really be a persistent stigma. That's what Iraq and Afghanistan have done. And these limited air attacks are likely to be with us,
Yeah,
for a long time.
I'm going to pick at you a bit. Yeah, it's the most peaceful possible air campaign you can possibly have against a country. And by the way, every single president since Bush loved to do this stuff. How many drone strikes and different Afghan weddings and things like that Obama and Biden and everybody else call in? They just didn't put it on the front of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and be like, "Hey, I'm going to bomb Iran."
Yes,
Or what?
that's right. That's right.
And
That's
you're
right.
right. I may be wrong about this
That's
because
true.
you're right. Like I cannot find the rational reason for this, and this is I think where geopolitics falls off the rails sometimes. Like I'm looking for the rational reason and I can't find it, and that makes me want to jump to I don't think it's going to happen, and I think there's going to be a deal. But you're right. I might be that might
It's
be
a
making a
domestic
mistake.
politics. Look, it's domestic politics. Was there a rational reason to make Zelensky look stupid in the White House and to be super mean and allow that meeting to go off the rails? Not really. Was there a rational reason to sign a stupid, like, rare earth mineral deal with Ukraine, which will never, ever in the history of mankind go anywhere? No. But it allowed the US to continue to support Ukraine. His supporters are right wing, isolationist, and so to
Sort of.
get them.
I mean, that rehashes an old fight we had, which I think Zelensky baited him the whole time, and Zelensky got exactly what he wanted. Like the Europeans are the ones that are supporting Ukraine right now. Like, yes, the U.S. is still doing some things, but like if you look at the data, it's shocking, like how much the Europeans are funding the war effort versus where the Americans were even 12 months ago.
In terms of funding, yes. But the weapons are still continuing to come from the U.S. Someone's just paying for them. Look, it doesn't really matter. The point is that he does this, and the logic from a geopolitical side doesn't necessarily exist. I think it's his negotiating style, and his negotiating style is attuned to the domestic political issues, which just proves something we all know. America is a very parochial country. It doesn't really care about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
It really, like, if America was like a human being, it does everything based on what happens inside the house. It doesn't really care about long-term relationship with friends. It's all about selling to its wife why X or Y or Z are going to have to happen. And
Yeah.
that's all he thinks about.
Parochial is a nice diplomatic way of saying stupid. So I'm glad you're coming around.
Okay.
Let's talk. Let's talk about something that I brought up, which in the chat you said we need to talk about this. Let's talk about nuclear proliferation. I already mentioned this, but so President Trump is pushing a civil nuclear deal with Iran that does not include non-proliferation safeguards. That's a strange double negative. Basically, he's saying the deal is not going to restrict Saudi Arabia from doing more than civil nuclear uses for its nuclear program. You look around the world, it's hard not to think that we're going to get, nuclear proliferation in a lot of these different parts of the world. So I'll let you cook here because you want to talk about it.
So I think that one thing that's happened over the last couple of weeks is a real acceleration in nuclear proliferation talk. We had Friedrich Merz of Germany suggest that Germany and France should have a European nuclear deterrent. We've had the Polish president, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, say that a nuclear deterrent might be needed, like a Polish nuclear deterrent. And I think Saudi deal with the US certainly points to that trajectory. Japan, South Korea, these are all countries. Sweden used to have a nuclear program. For those of you who don't know this, it was underground in Stockholm. It was unknown to the West. Sweden was a neutral, non-NATO country that in the 50s said, well, we probably should have a nuke too. And then it dismantled it. I think 1956 or something like that. The point is that I think in a multipolar world that you and I have been arguing we are in, we are going to see wanton nuclear proliferation. I think over the next 10 years, it's likely we're going to add 10 to 15 countries, which is, fascinating because we got two countries, after World War II, then it expanded to 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. And then there was like a burst in the 90s, right? Where we got, I think, India and Pakistan together, went for it. We had a dribble since then, like North Korea. And for the most part, nobody else really joined. I mean, it's quite fascinating because you're not talking about like 21st century technology. You're talking about like 1950s technology here, okay? 1940s to be exact. So you're talking about the technology that's like 80 years old. This isn't that difficult to do. And so the fact that we only have as many countries as there are, I think, are a vestige of American unipolar moment. You either didn't want to have a nuclear weapon because, well, you're under the American umbrella, so why would you? Or you didn't want to have one because you don't want the United States of America to bomb you as it did, or somebody else like Israel did to Iraq in the 1980s, to Syria in the early 2000s, and as we're seeing now with Iran. But to me, I think rather than expecting rogue states to make a go for it, I think you're really making a case for a lot of countries who were under that American umbrella. Well, guess what? President Trump has folded the umbrella and tucked it away. And so you're sitting there saying, like, okay, well, then why not have a nuclear weapon? Like, I'm South Korea. I'm a sophisticated, advanced, technologically country. I can whip this up in 3 months. You know, Japan is one of the largest refiners of plutonium. Like Japan can make a nuclear weapon in like 3 weeks. So I think that we should expect this to happen. I think it's going to be like the Dune universe, where every major house has its nuclear weapons. Um, this is where we're headed to, and I don't know. I'm not sure that like I talked to a nuclear physicist who works on disarmament and proliferation, and you know he said to me, he was like older than us, you know, like more experienced. He's worked during the Cold War, and he said to me, "This is a terrible future." And you know, I nodded, and I didn't really want to engage on this issue because I felt he was very emotional about that because he dedicated his whole life to non-proliferation. I'm not sure it's that clear cut. I don't know if it's a terrible future. I think like Ukrainians would argue that it's a great future because if they hadn't given up their nukes, they would still probably have a country that's whole. You know, some Libyans might today argue that had Gaddafi not given up his nuclear program, maybe their country would not be a disastrous, amorphous, lawless hellhole that it is today. So I don't know. I'm not. I'm open. I'm open minded to this actually making a multipolar world safer, at least for that kind of G20 top 20 economies that can sustain a nuclear program. Thoughts?
I think that I think at the nation state level, you're right. There's a reason that no state has used nuclear weapons since the United States bombed Japan at the end of World War II. It's because of mutually assured destruction between these different states. So, if you are a regime or a government that wants to remain in power, like a Gaddafi or a Kim Jong Un or something like that, it makes sense to have a nuclear deterrent because then the United States is not just going to make your country a parking lot. You can remain in power and have some degree of defense against them. Like that's the main deterrent, and stay in power. But I think the issue with nuclear proliferation is the more countries that have them and the more regimes that have them, the more the opportunity for a non-rational actor or for a non-state actor to get their hands on them. Because the moment you get a group that acquires nuclear material or a dirty bomb or even a missile or something like that itself and is able to do something with it and has a calculus that is not at the nation state level, that is like a jihadist group or some kind of terrorist group or something that some group that just wants to create chaos, and if they can get access to that kind of weapon, then you're not in that world. And there can be a false flag there, or maybe there's a nuclear retaliation to what was initially an accident, and the fog of war makes everything really, really scary. And by the way, I think the Dune example is very apt, because I'd have to go a little bit deeper into the Frank Herbert universe. It's been a minute, but Paul Atreides is doing something that is against what people expected by using his atomics to try and destroy the spice. Like, you're not supposed to use the atomics, but he's driven to the point of extinction, and he is leading, a a rabble
jihadist revolution
of jihadists who are controlling the energy, and he's saying, okay, like you brought me to this point, like I will destroy everything. And then he actually uses them in battle too, which breaks conventions, but then he becomes supreme emperor of the world because of that. Now, of course, he couples that with ultimate prescience. I mean, he's like basically a superpower, and his offspring turn into worms, and it gets really kind of weird. But yeah, I feel like Dune is case in point, that it's good until you get some type of figure,
some
who
lunatic
is willing to use.
Look at us.
Who's willing to.
We're Harkonnen patsies. We're gonna get somebody claim like, aha, we knew they were CCP and Harkonnen spies.
One of the best things I've ever written, I wrote an April Fool's piece back when I was still working for George. That was the Geopolitics of Dune. Yes. And I pretended to be like a geopolitical analyst who was analyzing all those things. It's still one of my favorite pieces. So no, I take your point. Like, I think on a state level, like for instance, Russia does not invade Ukraine if Ukraine still has nuclear weapons. Like, you'll get rid of that sort of conflict, but it just opens a door. And maybe the rejoinder to that is, that hasn't happened yet. Al Qaeda didn't get their hands on nukes.
Right.
Like, states are going to control these things. Yes.
Yeah, that's where. Look, where I was going to go with this is like, listen, we've had countries with nuclear weapons and technology that are far from stable. North Korea, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. It has technology. It certainly has enough material for a dirty bomb. Certainly. Pakistan, for God's sakes. Pakistan, like like Osama bin Laden was like chilling in Pakistan for years and they didn't know about it. Supposedly, allegedly, whatever. The point is, Israel, by the way, Israel, a country that's constantly stressed, tested with terrorist attacks and so on, like a country that could have lost its cool like 30 years, for 30 years in many, many ways. And when you put all of that together, no one's ever gotten their hands on dirty material or used it. Now, is that a good reason enough to say proliferation is bad or not bad? Well, listen, I'm talking about proliferation of countries that were allied with the US. So what I would say is like, yeah, I do think that if Pakistan and North Korea and Iran effectively have nuclear technology already, if Japan, South Korea, Poland, the Nordics, Europe joined a party, Canada is nuclearly capable. It was originally part of the Manhattan Project. So yeah, Canada can whip up a nuke very quickly. If these countries were to join, Australia as well, like, is the world less safe? And my argument is no. The question is, though, the Dune universe is a good parallel. And apologies to those of you who are not obsessed with Dune. Hashtag join the revolution. I mean, if you're not going to do it for the incredible writing and deep, sophisticated parallels to our universe, at least do it for, Charlemagne's dreamy eyes, right? My point here is, in Dune, having nuclear weapons did not prevent our Atreides from getting decimated by Harkonnen. There is still conflict between the great houses in Dune. And so that brings the question of, once everybody has it, would it have prevented Russia from invading Ukraine? Would it have? I don't think so. I think what Russia would have done is they would have still done the 2014 interference with Ukrainian elections, politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They would have still supported, these rebels. I think what would have happened had Ukraine had nuclear weapons is that February of 2022, 4 years ago, would have looked a lot different, Jacob. Right? So, like, instead of going for Kiev, they would not have tried to attack Kiev, because that would have been kind of a decimating, like cutting off the head of the snake kind of an attack, to which Ukraine would have responded with nuclear weapons. But I still think they would have invaded the south east of Ukraine. And so you would have still had a conflict. I don't think that nuclear weapons, I still think the two countries can have a fight over a piece of territory, but there wouldn't be an existential attack on a country.
That, I think, is the point. Like, Russia would not have been able to attack Ukraine in a way that Zelensky's government, or whatever government was in power, would have interpreted as existential. They would have bit off the Donbass, and they would have, Zelensky would have looked at each other like, do we really want these Russian-speaking regions anyway? I guess not. I guess you can have them. But then you wouldn't, there was a blitzkrieg to Kyiv. Like, the goal of the Russians was to take out the administration. I'm going to zag here for a second. Maybe the zag
Please.
is, if nuclear proliferation leads also to large scale installation of nuclear power throughout the world,
Nice.
then it's the best thing that ever happened because that's the cleanest, safest energy in the world. And if we could bring the costs of energy down or close to zero, that's going to be fundamentally good for the human species. And if we're off hydrocarbons, if we're not burning coal anymore because we've just got a bunch of nuclear reactors, if the flip side of that is that everybody has a bunch of warheads, like fine, I think that's a world I'd want to live in. But if we just double down on the warheads and we're still burning coal in this world, probably not that great.
It's a great point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, please finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say my other I was thinking about like what it would look like if a Mexican drug cartel or if a Latin American drug cartel got its hands on nuclear weapons to try and defend its turf. But the problem with nukes is the moment you use them, everybody's going to hate you and is going to want to take you out anyway. So like, why would you ever use them? But anyway, that was sort of an aside.
Again, look, jihadism is abating. I'm sure I'm going to get some like hate mail from right-wing lunatics who still think like Islamists are relevant, but
Muslims are taking over Europe, Marko. Europe is about to be civilizationally erased by these Muslims.
Please.
It's gone.
I know. I want to light myself on fire there. Who's taking over Europe is awesome Latin Americans. Which is great. That's what Europe needs. It needs more. It needs its sexy back, and Latin America is going to bring it. So, anyways,
and not these flabby Serbians.
Yeah, flabby Serbs. Well, no, flabby Balkan people are making Switzerland like competitive in athletics. For example, like this is great. It's Sweden, like the greatest soccer player of Sweden is his last name is unpronounceable. So that's what the people of the Balkans are giving to Western Europe. But look, we had a moment. Last 30 years was the moment for a radical group that believes some Mahdi's coming back and wants to hasten that arrival to use a nuclear weapon, and they didn't. Like this just shows how difficult it is. As you point out, everyone's going to hate you. It's dangerous to do that, even for like a radical group, and it's just difficult to get its hands on. Pakistan is as close to a country that is, when you think of countries that are incapable of like controlling their geography, like it's a perfect example. And Pakistan has not let nuclear technology, materials proliferate. I think it's a great example of how once you get nuclear weapons, you almost like become an adult, and to retain respect of the rest of the world, to ensure the rest of the world doesn't send Chuck Norris to your capital to decapitate you. You almost have to like prove to the rest of the world that you're capable of not proliferating this technology. And North Korea and Pakistan, God bless them, have both kind of done that. So yeah, like if Poland and Sweden become nuclear powers, like, I'm not sitting here really being negative about the future of mankind in that scenario.
Yeah, no, I'm going to come around. I think you're right. I think this is a great take that nuclear proliferation is good for global stability and good for global energy. And I think the thing to actually worry about when you're talking about future terrorist groups, whether they're jihadis or some other flavor, because I'm sure there'll be new ideologies in the future. Like maybe we'll get a return to anarchism, or we'll get anti-AI radical groups that want to do things. And I won't step on this too much because I know we're going to do something about this in a couple of months, but like biohazards and biohealth and the manipulation of viruses and also drone warfare, like these are the province of those types of groups. They're going to be able to do them, whereas 100%. Nuclear weapons are the province of states. I think that's a good thing. Not a good thing. I think that's a good way to sum the argument. Not that it's a good thing that people might do that, just to be clear. Okay, let's try and hit two more topics before we close, because I know you got to get out of here and I have kids to take care of today. So I thought we might also discuss Marco Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference. Quite a difference from J.D. Vance's speech last year, which helped accelerate the rupture in U.S.-Europe relations. Rubio's speech was met with a standing ovation. I particularly enjoyed this one take on Twitter where Marco Rubio at one point is saying, "Armies do not fight for abstractions. They fight for a people, a nation, and a way of life. That is what we are defending." So every single one of those things is an abstraction. So armies don't fight for abstractions. Armies fight for an abstraction, and another abstraction. I really enjoyed that. It was, I don't know if you read the speech in its entirety. I think the reaction to it is maybe more important than the actual substance of the speech. And also the other American celebrity at the Munich Security Conference was AOC, who gave her own speech tying the rise of authoritarianism to economic inequality, like really her first attempt at getting her feet wet in foreign policy. So you can tell she's gearing up for a run for the presidency, just to put that in the back of our minds. And, I thought Rubio's speech was, it was very heavy handed, but he talked about how America was built by immigrants from Europe, that America wants to build a new century of prosperity with its cherished allies and oldest friends. We want to do it together with Europe. Europe has the spirit of creation, blah, blah, blah. The last line is, yesterday is over, the future is inevitable, our destiny together awaits. He could be Paul Atreides right there with a line like that. So I don't know. What do you, I saw some commentary that was like, how could the Europeans be clapping at this? Like this administration, I don't think they were clapping for real, or maybe they were just being polite. Do you think the speech has any import? Because I thought Vance's speech last year was hugely important. I thought it woke European capitals up in a meaningful way. Do you think this puts them back to sleep, or do you think they were just being nice?
There's no way that Europe is going to go back to sleep. I know a lot of hate mail is going to come my way because I tend to be optimistic about Europe, and European markets have absolutely crushed American for the last 18 months. So yeah, that's why I'm fucking optimistic, because that's what I do for a living. So yeah, I don't think that's happening. Apparently, a lot of Democrats came to Munich, and their message to Europeans was just, "Hey, listen, this administration is not going to be there forever. We're coming back." Like Newsom was there; they were all super excited, and then Europeans were like, "Yeah, we're not falling for that shit anymore. Like, we don't care. Like we're not gonna come like just because like Newsom becomes the president." Like, we're not going to fall for his like expertly slicked back hair. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, love you, thanks, but we're going to go and build our own security umbrella no matter what. And so I think that the reason they were clapping to Marco Rubio is it's just a sigh of relief. It's like, thanks for being polite, but message received, bro. Message received, and thank you for just being polite to us. There's no reason to be mean. There's no reason to call each other names. Although Marco Rubio did kind of say, like, hey, we are concerned about civilizational, like, drift of Europe. Like, he did reiterate that. And the Europeans just rolled their eyes and move on that front. Like, okay, cool. Like, like, you're picking up immigrants with white vans in your country. Like, like, just FYI. So I think that's just important, that I think there's an ideological aspect of the right wing in the US where when he talks about civilizational erasure in Europe, it's talking about its domestic politics. This is like Europeans get very, very insulted when they hear this. Like, don't lecture us about immigration. Like, just relax, Europe, man. Like, just relax. Just put yourself in the shoes of a right wing, conservative, MAGA person in America. They have to say you're being civilizationally erased in Europe because of what they're doing domestically in America. It doesn't mean like there's a drift between Europe and America. Like it's just, this is a domestic political issue for Marco Rubio and JD Vance and everyone else and the people who wrote the national security strategy. But national security strategy of the US, I'm shocked people don't want to just read. Just shut up, download the PDF and read, because if you actually were to do that, you would see that it says exactly what Marco Rubio said. The national security strategy of the US, which most journalists breathlessly hyperventilated because it used the term civilizational erasure, it also said Europe is critical to American security. It always has been. So you got to separate what's like just ideological fluff from what's the reality. And the reality is like, yeah, of course the US is not going to abandon Europe, but it's certainly going to downshift its resources that it gives to Europe to defend itself. And I think the reason there was a standing ovation for Marco Rubio is because he was nicer about this. He didn't talk about invading Greenland. There's just certain things. There's a certain kind of like European-American relationship is so bad that what gets you a standing ovation, standing clapping in Munich is just being like polite.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember with the Munich Security Conference, like you're talking to the security and foreign policy mandarins of the European Union, and probably a breath of fresh air to have somebody like Marco Rubio use the accepted forms for diplomatic discourse and talk that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think actually my takeaway from the conference, which is you have to take a step back from it, and Artif's already alluded to this, but you had AOC also on stage giving one vision of America. And you had Rubio giving another. I don't know if you saw it. You had Lindsey Graham apparently launching F-bombs at Mette Frederiksen and calling her a little lady and bringing up the whole Greenland thing again and how the United States was going to take Greenland. So you take all of that together, and if you're Europe, what you have is just a picture of American incoherence.
Incoherence.
Yeah,
complete incoherence. And also what's interesting to me is how Munich conference has become like a place where you go to wade your toes into sort of the presidential politics. You know, AOC is like now she's like, oh, I didn't go because I'm going to run for president. Come on, girl. Like, please, you know, like,
you're running.
You know, that's fine. And I think in many ways, maybe we're wrong. So maybe we are wrong. Maybe foreign policy is becoming sexier to the American voter if going to the Munich conference is something that all these, you know, potential presidential candidates, I mean, like Marco Rubio announced his candidacy with that speech, which is hilarious because he didn't really say anything. Did I read the speech? No. Why? Because it doesn't matter. Like everything that there is to say about US-Europe relationship has already been said by JD Vance last year, by the National Security Strategy, which everyone who listens to this podcast should download and read. We all know US is not going to carry Europe's bags anymore. Europe's got to be on its own. Got it. Cool. Marco Rubio just went there to sound presidential. That was it.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I don't think it's about I don't think it's that the American voter cares about foreign policy. This is party politics. So if you're going to be the standard bearer for a party, you have to show some foreign policy experience. Your party has to see you on the world stage and has to see you do something. So AOC is very clearly trying to show the Democrats, hey, I'm not just this crazy girl from New York City. Like I can do things on the global stage and I can make a big difference here. And in that sense, she lost. Like Marko stole the show with his speech and got his standing ovation. That's exactly what he wanted. He was able to show the Republicans cowering in their MAGA bunkers, hey, here's a guy who could actually maybe put things back together after President Trump leaves. Like I think he did mission accomplished there.
I agree. No, I think the looking presidential was pretty good. But I think it's also interesting that since then, there's a lot of things happening in Europe that we should also kind of touch on. And what's happening in Europe is, you had concurrent to the Munich conference, you had this summit of 19 EU member states that occurred at the same time, and they're basically just moving on. The EU is starting some pretty significant reforms, which I'm sure we're going to have time to discuss next time. But also, Spain proposed that they create a European security alliance that parallels NATO. As I mentioned earlier, Friedrich Merz is talking about a nuclear deterrent that's shared between France and Germany. And I think that you're starting to see, I think this will be the most important issue over the next 5 years. I think one of the most important themes out there is going to be the creation of a new geopolitical entity in Europe. Whether it uses EU as the blanket with which it kind of covers itself up, or whether it's one of these new proposals. I mean, you talked about two-speed Europe. We talked about this earlier, where like 6 member states, basically Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Poland, who was the 6th? Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Germany, Poland. I'm missing somebody. But they basically also are talking about just saying like, look, if the rest of Europe is not ready for these reforms, for this integration, for further economic cooperation, defense cooperation, we'll just do it ourselves. And you guys can kind of come on ad hoc. I think that this is really important. I think it's really important because like Napoleon was not, stupid. Hitler was pretty stupid. But, like in the past, Europeans tried to do this violently. And they did it because of ego, because of megalomaniacs who said, hey, I'm not going to just be emperor of France. I'm going to be emperor of Europe. Although Napoleon's point was like, we need to unite the European continent because the UK does not have our best interests at heart. Like, yeah, no shit. Hitler was looking at it from a perspective of like the biggest threat to Germany, but also to Europe, civilizationally, is communism, is Soviet Union. So yeah, you want to join this fascist grouping over here. So this has happened before. The logic just didn't really stand, and it didn't stand because Italy had an empire, because Spain was a world power. So it was difficult for Napoleon or Hitler to convince other countries in Europe that they needed to band together, even at the point of a gun, because these countries saw themselves as global powers that didn't need to join Germany or France to like pursue their interests. Like against who? America? America's like running around in like, assless chaps, like shooting at each other in the desert. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like we don't need to do any of this. Like America being a global power. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Well, fast forward to 2026, and it's like Italy's not a global power. Spain is not a global power. These countries definitely now the logic we've arrived at the world that Napoleon thought he was already in. In other words, this logic for integration is extremely strong. And all I hear when I talk to highly sophisticated investors around the world is that they're stuck in the 20th century paradigm. Like, Marko, this will never happen. These people are different. They talk different languages. Like Spanish or Spanish. The Italians see themselves as Italian. And I'm like, listen, countries don't unite out of love. They unite out of fear. And Europe and Europeans have never had as much geopolitical fear imposed upon them as they do in 2026. So yeah, I do think next 5 years we're going to see some really cool stuff out of Europe from a geopolitical perspective, and I'm all for it. I think it's going to be very exciting to cover.
Yeah, not as much fear. The last time probably when the Ottomans were at the gates of Vienna. I know you have to get out of here,
good
but
point.
I think
Yeah.
I think that's a great place. I think our next podcast should be the new Europe and the new Japan, because we didn't touch on Japanese elections, and I think this Europe topic is very fruitful. I just want to say before we close, your examples are also great because France before Napoleon was left for dead. The revolution, France was in tatters. Everything was terrible. The economy was terrible. They couldn't project power. And then Napoleon rises and he almost conquers all of Europe. Same with Germany. Like after World War I, Germany looks like a shell of itself. Its demographics are terrible. There's no way it can do anything. Boom, almost takes over all of Europe. So I think those are particularly apt examples because you're coming from, two countries that try to unite the European peninsula who 10, 20 years before they tried it, everybody had left for dead and thought were completely incompetent. And I think markets and the United States and the consensus view is doing the same thing with Europe now. Europe is left for dead. It's Muslims running around everywhere. The demographics are terrible. They can't do anything. They're awful. They just sit in their churches and eat their food. Everything. Like they're coming. Like when the Europeans decide to come, like history shows us that it changes the world. So anyway,
well, I think it's the depression about Europe is fascinating. I mean, Americans think everything you just said because they watch YouTube clips by some dude in a basement in Iowa telling them that like Europe's demographics are terrible. Oh my God, if another person on X tells me how European demographics suck, bro, everyone's demographics suck, okay? But Europe's got something on this front that I think nobody realizes. There's like 7 million Ukrainians running around Europe, all right? Like that's a huge infusion of young, enthusiastic, ready to work people. And then Spain is this incredible backdoor into Europe for Latin American immigrants. Like high quality Latin American immigrants, educated people, because you got to get on a plane to get to Spain. So you're talking about an incredible infusion of, I think, dynamic, educated, hardworking, relatively young people, schooled, trained, vaccinated on somebody else's dime. You know what I mean? Like when you show up in your 20s, somebody else had to pay for your life, healthcare, education, and you show up in Europe ready to just make money. And because Europe has a labor market that is single, like once you get into Spain, once you get that work visa, you can pretty much move anywhere else. You can go to Finland if your heart desires. And I think that that's very, very important. And that's something that a lot of people just don't understand and they denigrate it. And I also think that Europeans, and I know this is where the hate mail is going to really jump to the roof, is not bad at integrating people. I mean, some countries better than others, obviously. The French. French banlieue is obviously terrible. We all know that. But I look at Sweden or Switzerland and people are like, oh, no, it's terrible there. I'm like, I'm not so sure. I think Switzerland actually is extremely
good. Or Germany.
Good.
Look at Angela Merkel lost her career because she stood up for immigrants. And maybe Brexit happened because she was lecturing the British about it. Have they had trouble taking in the? I mean, maybe I'm going to get hate mail from the Germans on that.
You are going to get hate mail, just because yes, inviting everybody into Germany, okay, mistake. right? Having very easy asylum laws. So somebody just walks in and says, like, I'm being politically prosecuted. It's like, bro, you're an accountant in, like, I don't know, like Beirut. Like, I think you're fine, like, so yes, you went too far. I get that. But what I think a lot of Americans and non-Europeans don't understand is that a lot of the immigration into Europe is intra-Europe. So like a Romanian showing up in Berlin is not that big of a deal. Like this has happened before. Europe has a long history of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who are German whose last names clearly show they're Slavs, but they're Germanized. Why? Because after the 30-Year War in the 17th century, Prussia didn't exist. He needed to bring all these Slavs to come and become German peasants. That's what happened. This has happened throughout Europe's history. Mass migration has happened, and I don't know why, but they're not that bad at integrating people, and that's why I think that um, yeah, I mean that's just one thing. That's the favorite way for people to talk about Europe negatively. I mean, the Trump administration literally has made it a policy, civilizational erasure. I don't think any civilization is going to be erased in Europe. In fact, Europe is going to do what it's been doing for the past 2,000 years, which is turning non-Europeans into Europeans, churning them into Europeans. So I think Europe is fine, and I think actually it's going to be an interesting place. Um, Geopolitics don't move in a straight line. I think that's important for everyone to understand. What you thought was impossible 10 years later, maybe even 5 years later, becomes possible. I mean, we had an Al Qaeda terrorist interviewed by Cristiano Mamapur.
Yeah.
He's now the president of Syria, and we're all like clapping and wishing him well. Like that's how geopolitics works.
No, it's why we have to do the New Europe for the next episode, because you're right in a certain sense, but I think one of the reasons that Europe gets that reputation is because of the shift from multi-ethnic empires in the 19th century to nation states in the 20th century. And the way that the Europeans dealt with that, especially the Germans, was not particularly good. They did not integrate their Jews and their Romani and everything else. They just
Slavs.
killed them.
Yep.
They're
Yes.
Slavs. They just wanted to get rid of them. But if you look at the 1800s, the 1700s, the coffee houses of Vienna in the 1700s, like we're talking incredible multi-ethnic empire. So ironically, what you're talking about is what the Trump administration does not want. They want the nation state to be the atom of society. And true European civilization, when European civilization became the thing that Rubio is lionizing, it wasn't nation states. It was these multi-ethnic empires where you could cross borders and do things. And the question is, can Europe have the efficiency of the nation state, but also have the coffee house
And
from
listen,
Vienna?
had we Serbs not killed Franz Josef, Austria-Hungary would have maybe incorporated Serbia and our world-class athleticism and maybe become the steampunk, like just 20th century powerhouse. Maybe that is a future. And that's exactly what you're talking about. The coffee houses of Vienna, where Hungarians and Croats and Slovenes and Czech and Germans are sitting together talking about the future. That's exactly something that got derailed by 1848. That got derailed by 1914. But it's the only way that Europe is going to survive in a multipolar world. And I think what's interesting, what you're saying, is that there is this kernel of European culture and history that makes it possible.
Yeah.
So that's cool. All right. Thanks,
All right.
man.